So the first thing I want to do today is apologize that I can't be there today with you guys. As my group members probably have said already, I have a job interview today, and I'm hoping that some of my general goofiness and way of being will come out through this medium as well, and that it is at least as engaging as I would be in my true human form and my true human presence. So without further ado, here goes nothing. Did you know that the US is the country with the second largest population of Hispanics and Latinos in the world? I bet you didn't know that. And even if you did, you probably saw it in a video by Univision or Univision saying that, talking about the importance that Latinos and Latino immigrants play in the US. The current US population is 17% Latino, and the US Census Bureau predicts that within the next 50 years, Latinos will make up 31% of the U.S. The current population is estimated to reach 128 million. In 2014, the U.S. saw the largest number of unaccompanied minor childhood arrivals. This new record of unaccompanied minors clocks in at 67,339 unaccompanied childhood arrivals. Previously, most of these unaccompanied minors were coming from Mexico, and what we're starting to see now is that there's a lot more coming from Central America, and Loyola has done a lot about informing us about these kinds of things, but I just wanted to give some big numbers so that we can just kind of put this in perspective. Mexico is actually the lowest number of childhood arrivals. We have 15,634 unaccompanied minors coming in from Mexico, and now the greatest number is coming from Honduras, the murder capital of the world, at 18,244. El Salvador at 16,404, and 17,057 from Guatemala. And this is all from ICE, as they have kept track of all the unaccompanied minors that are coming through the borders. Another piece I thought I would pick up on is the religious aspect of Latinos. Typically, we read in our books about cultural and ethnicity. We typically see that Latinos are Christian, more specifically Catholic. And while the majority still are Catholic, there have been a lot of changes once people immigrate to the U.S. to what that religious population looks like. So your usual majority of Catholics is actually being lowered, has become lowered as they come into the U.S. We're now starting to see about 22% Protestant, 55% Catholic, 2% Jehovah's Witnesses, 3% other, and 18% unaffiliated with any sort of religion, which is something that maybe you weren't expecting to hear. And this is a big part of the acculturation process, and I'm going to talk a little bit about some of these intergenerational differences. And so our 18 to 29-year-old demographic is showing a 31% of unaffiliation with a religion. That's huge. That's totally different from the overall average, which shows you that there's differences from the different age groups. Another piece I wanted to pick up on is renewalism. It's something that maybe not a lot of people are familiar with, and renewalism is, let me just read you my definition, is an animated movement within the Catholic and Protestant faiths that involves visions, divine healing, and direct revelation from God. I can speak a little bit about this from personal experience. My mom is actually a renewalist. And it's a very animated movement within the Catholic Church and the Protestant Church. It's often referred to as either Pentecostal or charismatic, more so charismatic in the Catholic sector, but Pentecostal in the more Protestant sectors. But why is it important to know about renewalism? Well, it's a good way to learn what the healing process is for people who identify as renewalist or as charismatic or as Pentecostal. We can work as social workers, as mental health practitioners, we can work with this framework. We can work with priests, we can work with pastors, and with individuals themselves to understand what healing looks like to them. I'm going to move into a little bit more about some of the primary problems that Latinos are experiencing in the U.S. when they immigrate. So one of these two big ones, depression and suicidal ideation. The Center for Disease Control in 1998, granted this is a long time ago, but from my experience doing research in the Latino community, I've seen that these rates of depression, of suicidal ideation, are still relatively high. And they reported that Latinos have the highest rate of depression and suicidal ideation than any other race or ethnic group. And also, another important thing to remember is that Latinos often externalize their symptoms. It's very common in Latinas, actually, to present with externalizing symptoms, or as another way to talk about that is somaticizing. So they take on a physical aspect. So like it could be pain in the lower back, headaches. These are the kinds of things that we see typical with Latino depression. And also, Latinos have a 7% lifetime prevalence of PTSD. And that's another thing that I thought was interesting. That's a big amount, but I think what was more surprising to me was that those who were foreign-born were less likely to have PTSD than those who were here. And a big part of that is probably acculturative stress, which is what's been in the literature a little bit lately. But I want to hold off on that. I'm going to talk about acculturative stress a little bit later. So another thing I wanted to talk about was incarceration and deportation. This is another big issue that plagues the Latino community in the U.S. And I wanted to start off with saying that 34.4% of prison inmates are Hispanic or Latino. And this is from the Federal Bureau of Justice in 2015. 48% of the offenses were for immigration and 37 drug offenses. The other thing I wanted to talk about was deportation. Okay, the ICE reports that in the 2014 fiscal year, they deported 315,943 individuals. We all know what deportation does to families, does to communities. It separates people. It causes stress. It's a risk factor to the people that we work with. It causes great grief, great distress, people who are separated by borders. To know that you're separated by a border and there's something legal keeping you from being with that person is just painful. And I can relate to that. And I think that's exactly why I wanted to bring up deportation and how it separates families, because I can understand it, but I haven't lived it. The other thing I wanted to cover was barriers to treatment. So one thing that I've learned from doing research with Latinos in mental health, specifically depression, is that Latinos underutilize mental health services. And they often suffer from premature termination. And this has kind of been a mystery for a while, but let me demystify this for you a little bit, okay? Premature termination. Well, when you're working with a therapist who maybe doesn't speak your language, who maybe is using ways of engagement and assessment that you are not used to, maybe that would make you feel a little bit uncomfortable, I think. And I think everybody here knows that. That's why we're in this migration subspecialization, so that we can make sure that we are sensitive to culture and that we're able to engage people in a way that is acceptable to them, that is going to make them feel comfortable approaching from a space of cultural humility, as many have said, and I really love that. Again, high rates of poverty are another barrier to treatment. I didn't cover poverty earlier because I think one of the major components of it is it's a barrier to acquiring services of any kind, whether it's mental health, whether it's acquiring food because of your legal status, whatever it is, acquiring benefits because of your legal status. Sometimes it's not so much that they want it, but they can't get it. It's that the perceptions of mental health actually are keeping them from seeking treatment. And I mean, I've heard it in my family in Mexico. My cousin was saying that she was depressed, and everyone in the family was saying that doesn't exist. Depression doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. And there's actually been a lot of ad campaigns that I've seen on Univision and on Telemundo, where there have been commercials talking about these mental health things. There's been commercials on depression, commercials on suicidal thoughts. I mean, the Latino community is finally targeting these issues and breaking these cultural boundaries that make people think that certain mental illnesses don't exist and that people don't need help. And it's often thought of as a weakness. It's a weakness of character. And that's true among a lot of cultures, but especially in the Latino culture. And now I'm going to talk a little bit about acculturative stress. One of my favorite kind of concepts to talk about. And that would be acculturative stress. Let me give you a brief definition from my tablet right here. And acculturative stress is the experience of various difficulties in assimilating to a new culture, including changes in socioeconomic status, language, social networks, and racial or ethnic discrimination. So, acculturative stress and how it affects school outcomes. Okay. Well, obviously, as the research has shown, acculturative stress affects school performance. And this is from the Roche and Cooper-Mink 2012 study. But that also found that school connectedness was a protective factor in that relationship between the decrease in school performance due to acculturative stress. So what is school belonging or school connectedness? It is the degree to which a student feels supported by school personnel, including teachers and staff. And how is it that we, as social workers, mental health practitioners, can help foster a sense of school connectedness? Well, there's two ways really you can do this. Number one is encourage said student, child, to participate in some sort of activity at school. That's number one. If you can get a student going to something that they love and find something that they're really passionate for at the school, that has been shown to increase school performance. Yes, education is an important component of helping empower our clients, helping empower the students that we're with is helping them realize that with education, they can make their dreams come true. And finding a passion at school is an essential part of that. Another way is just having the student or child build relationships with the people around the school, whether that could be a teacher or somebody that the student can count on at school, whether it be a friend, possibly a janitor, a security guard, a principal. Wow, it's a therapeutic alliance, but with an entire system, and that would be the school system. And again, you got to have that positive environment for that to happen. And that's really how acculturative stress can be taken off of its pedestal of control over student outcomes. And last but not least, something that's often used in schools is cognitive behavioral interventions. And one of the big ones is the Cognitive Behavioral Intervention for Trauma in Schools, or CBITS, which has a couple different components that I'm just going to go over really quickly, because I know Erin's going to cover this in a lot more detail. She's bringing the manual so that you guys can take a look at it. Psychoeducation, relaxation, connection between thoughts and feelings. That's the big CEBT program right there. Thoughts and feelings. Avoidance and coping, imaginal exposure to trauma, and relapse prevention. This has been shown to be effective with Latinos and all other immigrant groups. It's really, you know, as much as it would be great to get the whole family in there, often as a school social worker, we don't have access to the whole family. And it's, again, there's a lot of barriers to treatment. And I know a lot of people are against CBT, but I think CBT is important because it offers skills that can be applied across different scenarios. And at least it gives the student or the client a baseline from which to grow. Once a student has some skills with which to cope with different things, I think that allows the student or client to have a little bit more freedom and liberty to express him or herself once they feel like they have some tools that they can use to help them out. And that's my piece for now. Take it away, ladies.